Hi there, guys, and welcome to this week's edition of the Wise Crypto Sunday Special with me, your host, Chris Coney. My guest analyst once again is Juan Villaverde. Juan, welcome back to the Sunday Special, firstly.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Good to be here.
Great to have you, mate. This was an offshoot from a previous conversation we had. I've called this one Bitcoin Investing on a Cosmic Scale because you and I got to touching on this topic, and now this seems to be the way it goes with you and I. We sort of had come up with new ideas for other conversations within other conversations, which is kind of how the exploration goes, I suppose. So when I say Bitcoin investing on a cosmic scale, this whole conversation is based on an invention called Starlink, right? So
Yes.
to make sure everyone's on the same page, as I normally like to start out, what the hell is Starlink?
Oh, so you want me to say that? Okay.
Yeah, I can do that, or whatever, go for it.
No, my understanding of Starlink is that it's internet. It's space-based internet. It's basically, it's you have an antenna that's connected directly to a network of satellites in space, and boom, you have internet. So it's a way to avoid being locked into your geopolitical. Sorry, just immediately went there, but it's a way to not be locked into your whatever geopolitical location you happen to be in, because wherever you go, if you have your antenna, you can point it to the satellite network and boom, you have internet. And this is pretty fast too.
Sure. Well, yes and no. We'll get to that in a sec. But Starlink is a product of SpaceX. So Elon Musk, reusable rockets, he's mastered that. And you're like, well, why would you? I think he's thinking more fundamental. If you've got a space courier, which I suppose is what you could call SpaceX, a cheap, reusable rocket that can carry stuff into orbit, you can provide that as a service, right? And one of the services it's been providing is taking, I think they take 60 Starlink satellites up at a time in one of those Falcon rockets. And
Yeah.
they've got 1,600 of them now in orbit. So they've covered the entire planet. So that's kind of interesting. And it's, like you say, it's satellite-based internet, which is fascinating because it doesn't require any fiber optic infrastructure, or what did we start using? The telephone lines was what we first started using. That was the only cabling that we had available for the internet, dial-up, then fiber optic cable, and now it's going to be satellite-based internet because it makes sense to do that, because that's almost like, instead of laying fiber optic cable across the entire world, well, just one satellite network does the same job as all that cabling.
So my understanding is, if I may interject, these are more complementary. I heard this from Elon himself. He was talking about the differences between 5G, fiber optic, and Starlink, the
Okay.
satellite-based. And my understanding is this: for places with high population density, you still want either 5G or fiber optic, because Starlink is best for rural areas or areas with low population density. Essentially, because these satellites are, the way Elon describes it, they shoot a beam of light into Earth, and whoever is within that beam of light is going to share the same bandwidth. So if you have a lot of people in a small space, a lot of people have to share this bandwidth. Whereas if not that many people live there, then you get all that bandwidth all to yourself, or whoever lives there. So this is why I think it's interesting. This unlocks the possibility of those of us who are, quote unquote, internet native, to go to remote places of this world and still have access to our precious internet. So it allows people to, it's one of those dominoes, it's one of those things that is going to enable people to leave the city. Because right now, one of the main reasons you want to stay in the city, I personally had to do this recently, is you move into the city to have good internet, fast internet, because you need that for work. Now, come Starlink, that's gonna be a different decision. It won't be the same. You will have the option of being a bit more remote, in a bit more remote location, and still have access to this, increasingly becoming essential service. Like, this is increasingly becoming something that you absolutely need to be part of society. So that's why I think it's interesting, because it brings high-speed internet to places where previously or currently it's just not available.
I'm totally with you. So it's good you said complementary. That's good. And it's almost inverse to fiber in the sense that it works
Yes.
better where there's a lower population, whereas fiber works. I mean, you can only afford to install it if there are enough customers to share the cost of installation and so forth.
Correct.
Gotcha.
That's what I think is interesting. Complements it.
Yeah.
So I think that's fascinating
So
for its implications.
I wrote a note here about Metcalfe's law. Do you want to do that one, or do you want me to do that one?
Go ahead.
Okay. So by extension, right, the benefit of having more users or internet users is directly connects into Metcalfe's law, which is a law that states that the value of a network is equal to the number of users squared. Now, what that means is that if there are only 2 telephones in the world, each user would only have one other person they could call. So that would be 1 times 1, network value of 1. And then if you had 5 telephones in the world, each user can call 4 other people. That's why you square it, because every new addition to the network is not just one new connection, it's one new connection for everybody else. So you get this exponential growth in the number of connections as more and more users join the network. So the rollout of even internet infrastructure stalls if you can't afford to lay down fiber optic cable or even telephone lines, say in rural Pakistan, or even cell phone signal, right? So once that problem is solved and you've got global coverage of high-speed internet, fiber in the cities and Starlink in the suburbs and in the rural areas, now you've got a true global population on the internet equal to the population of the world. If you've got 7 billion people, 7 billion people can access the internet. And we tend to think anyone can access the web, but they can't. There's still billions of people that don't have access to the internet, which means that all the growth that we've enjoyed in e-commerce and so forth will continue to rise. So how this impacts crypto then is we tend to get overexcited about crypto when we say, oh, this is going to build a new financial system for the 7 or 8 billion people on planet Earth. But that sort of skips over the fact that you kind of need to be able to access the internet to do that. And while you can now buy an Android smartphone for $30 odd, anybody can do that, you still have the problem of A, the connectivity, and then B, the banking infrastructure. Well, DeFi solves that, but you need to be able to connect to these networks, and that's what Starlink is going to enable for anyone who doesn't have high-speed internet access, right? So that's why I wanted to touch on this in the context of crypto. You got something to say?
Right. So yeah, there's a lot to say about this. So on the one hand, it is absolutely true. I mean, the crypto needs the internet. I mean, crypto is an internet native technology. It's a technology enabled by the internet. So yes, if we want crypto to take over the world and radically transform the world of finance, money, and governance, we're basically saying we need everybody connected to the internet. And there's a ton of people who live in rural areas, remote areas that don't have access or didn't have good access to this technology. And if not, and as long as that's the case, these people will not be part of the crypto economy. So this is a major issue. How do you bring internet literally to everybody across the globe? This is part of the solution. There's another problem, which is it gets to censorship resistance, in my opinion, which is like, yeah, we all talk about crypto. We all talk about this promise of, separating money from state, radically transforming the world of money, finance, and governance. But we often tend to forget that we still live, and this is, I blame mostly crypto people for this, or internet software people. We tend to forget that we still live in a physical world. And we tend to forget that this infrastructure, this internet infrastructure for now, is still basically owned by governments. In other words, if the government of some nation decides that they don't want their population to have access to the internet, they can and do shut down access. I mean, this happened recently to friends of mine in Colombia. They would have their internet access shut down. Why? Because the government owns the infrastructure. And if people are using the internet for things the government deems inappropriate, like organizing mass protests against what people viewed as draconian taxation in Colombia, guess what? You're going to lose access to the internet, and you're no longer going to be able to use this essential infrastructure. This creates a problem, Because on the one hand, you have this crypto technology that lives on the promise, or thrives on the promise of, yeah, it's going to separate money from state, it's going to revolutionize the world, it's going to bank the unbanked, it's going to bring more financial inclusion than has ever been dreamed of. But on the one hand, it all rests on people having access to an infrastructure that, for now and up until this point, governments have the keys to. So if someone, I'm not saying this is going to happen in, the more advanced democracies of the West, but it happens in other places that I would argue need crypto the most, like Colombia, like Venezuela, like Iran or Pakistan. I mean, these places, or name your African country, there are so many places that need crypto more than some of us here in the West. And these places don't have access because they don't have solid internet, or rather decentralized internet infrastructure. And at a moment's notice, the government could shut down their access. And in fact, I don't think, I'm going to go on a limb here and I'm going to say no country and nobody is safe from this, because the only reason this hasn't happened to the so-called democracies of the West is because crypto has not been threatening enough to these people. But the minute crypto, and this is a larger issue that's been discussed more and more recently, is the more crypto becomes a thorn at the side of policymakers, especially financial elites, the more they're going to seek to shut it down. I mean, this whole episode that we saw recently with Coinbase about them not having clear what the regulations are and what exactly what is it that they can and cannot do according to ever-shifting guidelines. This gets to the issue of the relationship between the crypto industry and the legacy financial system is not exactly one of happy cooperation. I would say that it's more like it's antagonistic, but it hasn't really become what's the term I'm looking for here? It hasn't quite become an all-out conflict yet, but it could. And when that happens, if the elites of this world, if the financial elites, if the ones holding the keys to our money and our financial freedom, or our finances rather, if these people can just turn a key and shut down our access to the internet, guess what? Crypto cannot do what it's supposed to do unless the internet infrastructure itself becomes decentralized. I'm not saying Starlink is the solution to this, but it's a solution, because if you're in Venezuela or in Colombia and you have Starlink, I very much doubt that Elon Musk will care that some politician in Colombia wants to shut down access to their own citizens because they don't like what they're posting on social media, or they don't like the fact that they're using this Bitcoin thing to bypass whatever draconian financial repression laws they've come up with. Elon won't care. So what this does is it kind of removes the control that a nation state has over the internet of its own citizens. It creates a bit more of a level playing field. It gives access to people that otherwise wouldn't. It takes away some of that censorship power that states have on the internet itself, because we always talk about censorship resistance when it comes to money itself and having access, but having access to the internet is key to achieving that end. And so what if they shut you down? What if they just say, well, you can't use the internet anymore? Then there's no crypto. There's no industry left. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but it could. Mm-hmm. So this is part of the equation. So any conversation that talks about how crypto can radically revolutionize the world also needs to be a conversation about how we're going to make sure that people have access to the internet in a way that cannot be taken away from them. Because if not, this is what we call a single point of failure. Internet infrastructure. So the satellite-based internet is the best we have. I mean, I hope that we can eventually move on. I think some of the people in Bitcoin have done this, where we have decentralized ownership over these space-based internet systems. But hey, maybe one day we'll get there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's a good point about this actually came up in my research about Starlink. The bad news is that Starlink may not be able to just arbitrarily offer service in any country that it chooses, because according to what I read, they have to be granted a license, like a telecommunications license, by each national government, which seems a bit crazy considering it's a satellite network. So that's such an artificial barrier, because by nature of it being in space, it doesn't recognize the geographic border of even Africa, the continent. So why you say, well, that space beam isn't allowed to operate in that area of the globe, is totally nonsensical. And it's still the archaic idea that the government owns that landmass and can rule it, right? Even if the people launch their own rockets and fund it privately and then want to use the service privately, it's government getting in the way again of people just wanting to do what they want to do, right? And some countries, like you say, are just not going to do it. What about North Korea? They're not going to accept that kind of empowering technology, are they? Not likely.
Not likely, but I would my counter to that would be that once you have the technology in place, you're one step closer from getting rid of that arbitrary border-based barrier to have internet access. Because, I mean, let's face it, we now have the technology to bypass these barriers. Okay, let's say we don't turn on these capabilities today, but at least we have the infrastructure up and running. At least we have the technology. I mean, think of Bitcoin as launching the entire thing we now know as the crypto industry. Step number one was creating the open blockchain we now know as Bitcoin. Maybe the creation of Starlink, or Starlink becoming available in all regions of the world, is step number one towards decentralizing access to the internet. This is how I'm choosing to see it. This is what I think. This is where I think this is going. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, but we will have the capability of bypassing the nation state altogether when it comes to accessing the internet. We'll have the capability, at least in theory, to do this, because we're taking care of the physical aspects of this issue, which is to create the infrastructure to be able to do this, perhaps at a later stage. We'll see.
So it's a good call.
We'll see.
So it'll be
By the way,
I'm
pretty sure there's going to be many ways to bypass those restrictions. Pretty sure. Because because again, coming from South America, I've seen such technologies in my country where people just set up an antenna and they connect to satellites that are supposed to be for Brazilians only. But hey, here we are in Uruguay, south of Brazil, using the same satellites. So you can trick, using software, you can trick the hardware. But the hardware you absolutely need the hardware to be in place if you are to trick it into doing something. In other words, I'd rather have this constellation of satellites that you may or may not be able to access than have nothing and still rely on your government giving you fiber and really just allowing you to use this technology. So I still think it's a step in the right direction.
Yep, absolutely. So once you've got control of that infrastructure, it makes it kind of hard to enforce these silly things like you need a national telecommunication license to operate. It's hard to enforce when you've got a satellite network, right?
It's hard to enforce, and I would argue that at that point we're talking about laws written on paper, no longer about capability. The capability is going to be there. Now, whether or not this capability is used, well, that depends on some agreement that this company or that company has with this or that government, but we'll have the infrastructure in place. And I think that's the most important part, is that we need the physical infrastructure to not rely so much on nation states to provide internet to us, because that's also a point of censorship that they could potentially exploit at some point in the future. And again, some governments have. I mean, look at the Arab Spring. And I don't know the details, but I do know that part of what happened back then is that governments shut down access to the internet for their own citizens. They just shut it down. They realized this is a no-go. They're using these things to protest, so let's just shut it down. And the same thing happened recently in Colombia. Same thing. They just cut off your access. Now imagine if everybody wants to use crypto and they want to stop using central bank issued currency, and the government says, you know what, we're not going to allow that, and we're just going to shut down your access, and you're done. You can no longer use this technology. I think that for now, Bitcoin is the only one that's really thinking about these issues and launching their own satellites, that if you have an antenna, you can connect directly to the Bitcoin blockchain. But the issue there is that
satellites.
Yeah, the Blockstream satellites. The issue there is that Bitcoin's simplicity kind of allows you to do these cool things,
Very
because at the end of the day, all you're going to do with Bitcoin is send money to a person. Like,
A to B.
send A to B. That's all you do. So yeah, you can think about having a satellite and using it for all your Bitcoin, satisfying all your Bitcoin needs with this Blockstream satellite. But think about a smart contract platform. Think about DeFi or NFTs. How are you going to do that without direct access to the internet? That's going to be far more difficult. I mean, interacting with these smart contracts without an interface, that's usually some web page. Pretty difficult. Not easy at all.
I'm with you. But it'll be a transition anyway. If Bitcoin can get its foot in the door, that'll open it up even wider for everyone else to come through. So that's a good thing. So you talked about. Go on.
It's a concept of precedent, right? You set a precedent. You slowly move in a direction. And like I said, launching these satellites, because I think they haven't connected the world yet. I think they will soon. They need like another 1,000 or whatever satellites. Once they do, okay, that's step number one. Now we have the infrastructure. Now we have the capability. It's just like crypto. I mean, with crypto, we now have the capability of running a monetary system, monetary and financial systems outside the purview and control of sovereign states. That's a good thing. Now, it doesn't mean we're doing it now or yet, but we can, and we probably will at some point. But step number one is to create the technology.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. So Starlink actually is still in beta right now. I think they only have numbers of subscribers in the tens of thousands. And if you go to the website, you have to get on a waiting list because they're still rolling it out, right? So I found this other stat in my research that says approximately 50 million US homes only have one broadband internet service provider and with maximum speeds of 25 megabits or no ISP at all. So that's in the United States of America, which is mind-boggling. Still only have one service provider to choose from or none. Which is like, so we're not talking about third world countries necessarily. Some Americans can't even get online and access DeFi. What the heck is that?
I'm not surprised at all. I mean, I was recently staying at this vacation place in Spain and I didn't have good internet. And I was basically an hour away from Barcelona.
Wow.
And if I drove an hour away, and this happens everywhere in Europe, well, you're driving in the middle of nowhere, in between cities. For the most part, there is no access. You don't have access. So everybody living in these regions that you would not otherwise consider remote, you don't have access. There's nothing you can do. So I guess this is the issue of living in these centralized spaces we know as cities. You get used to certain things, you take them for granted. You don't realize that actually just drive, a couple hours off in any direction, and suddenly there's no access and you're disconnected, and this thing that you considered essential is suddenly gone. I have this experience personally because I lived in a farm a few years ago for a while. My mother owns a farm. I was living there for a few months and I didn't have internet for the most part. There were certain times of the day where I could connect, and I thought, wow. And to think that there's so many millions, hundreds of millions, maybe even billions of people who live under these conditions, how are we going to bring crypto to them? And so that's why I immediately became very excited when I heard that Starlink is not only this thing that gives you access no matter where you are, it actually works better if you're in a remote location. That's, to me, mind-boggling. It's a game changer.
Sure.
Between that and a decentralized energy grid, I mean, having your own solar panels and perhaps windmills to generate electricity, I mean, that's it. That's all you need. Got water, got electricity, got the internet.
I think I made a note about that as well. Something about decentralized off-grid data centers. So imagine if you built a facility right next to a hydro plant and then got Starlink for internet and you're literally off-grid. You've got power for your facility, you've got internet, and you can run reasonable sized business office complex from that. Now, yes, supply chains, food, whatever. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like you can just, Bitcoin mining facilities, all kinds of stuff that at the moment can have the power but no internet. So now you've got the off-grid, it's just like it becomes nonsensical. There's no such thing as on and off-grid anymore. It's just you can get it from anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I guess, and again, this gets to the same issue that we discussed with mining before about being able to untap into previously unexploited resources. I think internet is part of that equation because even if you can build up this hydroelectric plant or whatever, and if you're in a very remote location and you cannot access the internet, well, you can't even run a Bitcoin mining. You can't run a Bitcoin mining operation unless you have internet access. Now, again, if you're a nation state and you have plenty of resources, yeah, maybe you can go out there and build all the infrastructure you need using traditional
Just run
technologies.
the cables, whatever.
Just run the cables, yeah. But what if you're a smaller shop and you want to mine off the grid using renewable energy where you have no energy expenditures because you're generating your own electricity? Well, then the internet becomes an issue because no one's going to build this infrastructure for you. So again, this is part of the equation. This, let's call it more decentralized internet, is going to allow society to become a bit more decentralized. And it's going to allow crypto to fulfill its intended use case. Again, we always forget. I'm not going to include myself in that group. I don't forget this, but a lot of people seem to forget that we still live in a physical space and you still need physical infrastructure. And so, and this is a criticism that a lot of people have of crypto. So, what if you shut down the internet? Well, okay, that's a fair criticism, I guess, but it's only fair in the sense that access to this resource, to the thing we know, the internet, is still a privilege for the most part. We don't realize that because there's billions of us living in these privileged locations that have access to all these services, but a lot of people don't have this. And internet, I'm telling you, internet is the one thing that makes people unable to make that decision to leave the city and move off the grid somewhere to live off of the land. Access to the internet is a barrier for these people. It's one of the main reasons that I'm aware of that people decide against doing this. And I know a lot of people personally that, thanks to Starlink, are now beginning to consider, actually myself included, we're beginning to consider going off the grid, going out on some more remote location to live in nature, away from cities. Having access to high-speed internet is a key driver of that decision.
So what that makes me think is that for someone like me who likes to bring people together, these co-working spaces you have in cities like WeWork and Regis and so on. Well, I'm like, okay, I'll just get a building, because you might have all of these people who want to live in nature in remote places, but might still want that office human interaction thingy. So fine, I'll establish a facility. The facility will pay, at the minute, it's $99 a month for a Starlink connection. And then you can just come and work there, use that internet, right? And it'll be high-speed internet, right? And then you might just use the internet at the office and then be disconnected at home. Maybe people might like that idea. But even the idea of sharing a Starlink means that if you were a village in Bangladesh, you could have one connection and then share it with everybody, right? I mean, it sounds quite expensive for a remote village in Bangladesh, $99 a month, but it'll come down, one, and two, you can share it. It can become a Wi-Fi hotspot in its own area, right?
Yeah, and again, I insist that this is just step one. Step one is creating this infrastructure. It's going to get better over time. In fact, this wasn't even Elon Musk's idea. This idea was around in the 90s. Yeah, I read it somewhere a while back that this wasn't even his idea. This idea has been around for more than 20 years of creating satellite-based internet, a constellation of satellites to give access to everybody. I'm glad he's doing it, but let's not forget this thing is going to get better. Just like Bitcoin led to Ethereum, which led to, whatever's hot nowadays in crypto, layer 2. Now it's all about layer 2. This is the same thing. It's a progression. And you start by doing this, and then we'll see what happens. I'm pretty sure that eventually we're going to see truly flagless internet, where no matter where you are, no matter where you go, as long as you have a device that's not even an antenna, it's just your phone, you're going to have access to Wi-Fi all over the globe. I mean, already we've seen this with phone calls and telecommunications. Now, if you have access to the internet, you no longer need to use local phone companies to make phone calls. And I would argue that they're even better than using
SMS. That's kind of like, you don't really use SMS now.
Exactly. Now you use all these messaging applications that you can use voice calls over them, video calls over the internet. And this is the next step is to make sure that you have access to this technology no matter where you are, because I travel quite a bit. Usually the way it works is you bring your phone with you and you have to buy a SIM card from a local provider. That's going away. Man, that's clearly going away. And I'm
That's
thinking that's what Elon
interesting.
and all these people are thinking about. They're
That
thinking
is
about, hey, let's
interesting.
yeah, let's make sure that internet becomes a truly global thing. No matter where you are, if you're subscribed, you're going to have access. And
Sure.
eventually, I hope we can move on to a world where this is just a fundamental right. I mean, you're just you just have access. You have your device and you're connected no matter where you are.
Well, actually, do you remember when satellite TV started coming along? In the UK, it's called Sky TV. They were one of the
Mm,
pioneers. And this is where you would stick a satellite dish on the side of your house to receive special television service, right?
yeah.
Well, and that sort of became a standard feature until still we started carrying the content over fiber optic cables. But just by the by, that might return, so that then you have the satellite dish on the side of your house comes back, but it's for internet,
Yeah.
and then you carry the content down that instead. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
interesting.
I'm thinking the next step is I would take it one step beyond that, and I would say you're probably just going to be able to just carry your phone
Oh,
around and connect to any
oh, okay, interesting.
infrastructure that's being set up
Now that's interesting.
anywhere. It could be these same companies. It could be Starlink itself setting up all these antennas all over the
And that's
globe.
probably the way it's going to go. So when you look at your phone, your new phone, you look at the specifications, and it shows the connectivity standards. It would be like telephone, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, 5G, and Starlink, or
Starlink.
whatever the
Yeah.
protocol is going to be. And you're like, oh, that one, and it'll look just like this, but it'll have a satellite transmitter in it, right?
Yeah,
In the
exactly.
phone.
Pretty
Like we
much.
don't have antennas on these things. Remember when we used to have the antennas either fixed or ones you pull out, but that's
Hmm.
gone. There's no Wi-Fi antenna. It's just a chip, right?
Yeah,
So that'll happen. I'm totally with you on that one.
pretty sure it will. I'm pretty sure it will, which is why I'm so excited about this technology, even though, again, and I heard that it's not as fast as it's supposed to be, and it has all these setbacks and all these drawbacks and whatever. It's step one,
But it
it's
exists though.
early.
It's not theoretical,
It's the first iteration of this technology.
right?
Again, just like Bitcoin was the first iteration of decentralized open blockchain technology. It's just the first iteration.
Well, I think they've got. When I say they've been rolling out in beta, I think they've got like 20,000 users in the beta test. So they're all paying their $99 a month. They've all got their kit that comes in a box, And maybe right now
Mhm.
you can just pack that up and take it with you, right? It's about the size of a laptop, so it's a bit cumbersome, but that'll come down, like you said, it'll come down to a smaller and smaller thing where you'll just put it on your desk, or you won't put it on your desk at all because it'll be built into the device. That's that's probably where it is going to go. So you're thinking slightly further down the track.
Yes, I'm pretty sure this is what Elon is thinking. I even read from Google that they were trying to do this. Like, there's a lot of tech people that are thinking about how can we bring internet to the masses in such a way that it doesn't rely on all this legacy infrastructure and all these actors don't have control over it.
It's interesting that Google
Um,
would be doing
yeah,
that because they're taking responsibility in a way because they're like, well, the limits, um, the number of users that can use our Google services is limited by internet access. So let's go and solve that problem so more people can use Google services. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying? So they're kind of
yeah,
like solving their own problem in that way.
yeah, exactly. And again, I not an expert in internet infrastructure, but you can tell pretty easily that you're basically constrained by national borders when it comes to accessing the stuff. And so all of these tech entrepreneurs are thinking of different ways of bypassing those. And even though, yeah, okay, well, I wasn't aware of the fact that there's still this piece of paper that says
Yeah,
you need to have permission from your local government. Okay, fine. I'm not surprised. But it's pretty different because it's just a piece of paper liable to change. If you have the capability, then eventually you're going to be able to exploit that capability. That's
mm,
how I'm seeing it. I don't think these laws will hold much longer. They're just going to have to change because they're going to become outdated.
absolutely, absolutely. So Starlink is the most famous provider of this. So let's just talk about competitors before we finish off today. So Amazon have been in the space race against SpaceX, but they are trailing behind by some margin.
Mm,
And in my research for this episode, I found this article, and the headline goes Amazon asked the FCC to reject Starlink's plan because it can't compete. So they're
that's
basically
funny.
asking because SpaceX they want to extend. They've got 1,600 satellites now ish. They've got um, permission to launch 13,000, and they want to extend it to 30,000. Right. So they've got that bandwidth, if you like, and then I think they've got then they've got a deadline to fill that capacity. Otherwise, they get the allocation revoked. So that's okay. I think Elon Musk is confident they can do it. But because Amazon's so far behind, what does this say here? Amazon has said it won't start launching any satellites until at least 2023. So they're going to be way behind the curve by then, which is very, very interesting. And
Yeah.
Amazon's, it's Kuiper, Cooper Systems. Cooper Systems, I don't know how to say that, but that's what the Amazon service is called. That's the Amazon subsidiary that's going to be doing the same thing, launching satellites and so on. So Amazon haven't even caught up with SpaceX yet in terms of mastering the launch and relaunch thingy, let alone sending satellites up with it, which is fascinating considering Amazon is a private company with plenty of cash.
I think they've been trailing. Is it the same company that is it Blue Origin? I think it's called. That's Jeff Bezos's. No, Jeff Bezos's space company is called Blue Origin.
Sorry, a big one. Yeah. Their SpaceX competitor is Blue Origin. That's right.
Yeah, Blue Origin, and they've always trailed behind SpaceX. I don't know what to make of it. I'm just glad there's some competition. I think it's funny that Amazon is trying to use the power of the law to stop a competitor. I mean, that's not what capitalism and free markets are supposed to be about. But hey, to each their own.
Hypocritical, because it's like what they're claiming antitrust or something. I don't know, which is the pot calling the kettle black a little bit there.
Yeah,
considering they're
pretty
monopolizing their space, their industry, as it were.
I don't think that's going to amount to much. I mean, trying to block a competitor using laws because you can't compete. I mean, this is pretty ridiculous. I don't think it's going to amount to anything. Whoever launches it first, though, is gonna. This is potentially a huge market. Satellite internet, space-based internet, I call it, because you arguably use satellite already. Yeah, we'll see. I heard that it's pretty early still, even for Starlink. I don't know why Amazon is lagging so far behind when, again, this is an idea that's been around for decades. Maybe it's not that simple, but we're going to figure it out at some point.
So because Starlink is a SpaceX product, I'm just thinking about, not financial advice, but I was thinking about the investment play. Well, if you hold Starlink stock, you'll get exposure to this, right? If it becomes profitable.
I don't think Starlink is a publicly traded company, though.
I think they want to be.
They probably want to be. And I also heard that they want to spin off Starlink into its own company.
Well, there we go. Good grief.
Yeah.
That's how they're going to raise tons of money.
This is how they want to pay for the whole thing. Yeah. Hey, all power to them. It's experimental technology anyway, so it makes sense.
Very true. Very true. That seems to be what
they would seek to do this.
Elon Musk is good at, is funding his projects with public money.
Pretty much. I mean, the man is really good at selling the dream, or at least convincing people that he's onto something.
Well, this is slightly off topic, but I did think about that earlier on in our conversation today. I'm like, I'm taking, this is totally my words, but is Elon Musk's strategy almost like grow it so that it's almost like too big to fail, so then it has to succeed, if you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying?
Make it till you make it. That's what Elon Musk's strategy is. It's fake it till you make it.
Maybe he's such an innovator, and he's pushing the envelope so hard, he ends up creating the impossible because he just keeps pushing the envelope.
I guess he realizes that as long as he has the resources, he can really, truly deliver on all these ambitious projects that he's trying to sell people on. I guess it's this whole debate of that gets down to, if you're giving enough resources and enough time, and you're competent enough, and I would argue that Elon is quite competent, then eventually you're going to figure something out that works. I think this is how he's viewing these issues. I mean, again, sometimes the difference between a failure and a success is, do you have the time and the resources to see it through to the end? And this guy seems to be pretty focused on that aspect of project building, let's just say, because all his projects are ambitious. They take ungodly amounts of work, time, and money and people to really see them through to the point where they truly take off and become self-sustainable, which none of them are at this point. I think he would argue that, again, as long as he continues to have access to resources, then he can truly build these things. This is always the issue. I mean, it's a similar issue. I've seen the same problem with many other completely different industries. Like I can think of there's this one video game that's called Star Citizen, very controversial. They've been building it for years. I don't know if it's 5, 6, it could be even, I think it's nearing 10 years since they started building it. It's not complete yet. It's not even close. But as long as people continue to throw money in their direction, and whatever they built so far is astonishingly good, it just cannot believe how amazing it is. And the more amazing things, amazing little pockets of technology they develop and showcase to people, the more resources they gather. The more resources they gather, the more amazing things they can build, which then brings in the next wave of excited people who want to be part of this project. Sometimes it's the same people over time that continuously support these things they believe in. And so you could argue that as long as they can keep the resources coming to keep the lights on, then yeah, eventually they're going to deliver something because you can see the progress. Same thing is true for Cardano, for example. Extremely ambitious project in the crypto space. They basically went back to square one and started from scratch. I mean, redefining what's the fundamentals of how a smart contract platform is supposed to work, the fundamentals of what proof of stake is, how these systems should operate. They're very thoughtful about everything they do. But then again, if the money were to stop flowing, Cardano would fail. It would fall flat on its face. And in fact, it got really close back in 2019, I think it was. I mean, you could see that they were getting nervous. They were running out of funds. They were running out of money. But then the bull market came, and now people are super excited about Cardano. And but you could always make the case that as long as people are not sitting on their asses doing nothing, which Elon, the Star Citizen people, the Cardano people, these people are doing real work. So as long as they can guarantee that these resources will continuously flow into them, eventually they'll deliver. I think Elon understands this perfectly, which is why he's so focused on the PR side of things, how people perceive him, how people perceive his businesses and his ambitions. I think he's perfectly aware, aside from the fact that he's personally benefiting from all this. But aside from that, I think he understands that these things are so ambitious and would take so long to really see through to the end that you really need to keep people hooked. You need to keep people coming back.
He's the the chief faith officer. He needs people to keep the faith, keep the faith, keep the faith. And because so I wrote down there, he's sort of speculating on human creativity.
Yeah.
Right? If he believes anything is possible because we can create anything, that's a general principle. He's like you said, given enough time and enough resources, someone will crack it. And it reminds me of some Think and Grow Rich. Do you know the Henry Ford story when he's like, we're going to create an 8-cylinder, the V8 engine, and every 6 months his engineers are coming back to him saying, "It's Henry, it's impossible, mate. It's impossible." He's like, "It's possible. Carry on." Right? And then go back to the lab, come back another 6 months later. "Look, we've run out of money. It's impossible." He's like, "There's some more money. Carry on." And eventually, boom, the Ford V8 was invented. But he was like, "It's possible. Carry on. More resources, more time, you know." And then we have the Ford V8, which is rest is history.
It is a double-edged sword. I think before you actually make it, you're going to have a ton of people doubting whether you're ever going to get there.
Well, because they can't see it, and that's what the visionary does, though. He's the visionary. It has to keep that. I can see it. It's real. It's going to be real. It's going to be real. Keep the faith, right?
Exactly. Now, again, these are interesting dynamics because you could argue that until you make it, you just really don't know for a fact that you will.
Or if it's full of hot air.
Exactly. Maybe this is hot air and it will never amount to anything and it's just vaporware. Maybe. But as long as people keep the faith, as long as people keep the faith and keep pouring resources over to these visionaries or crazy people, take your pick, then eventually they may deliver something. And I think that's why it's important for the market or for the public to keep their feet to the fire and really make sure that they keep close, that they oversee what these people are doing and that these people show what it is they're building. Like Elon loves to launch rockets into space and launching all these beta applications for people to see what it is they're working on. I think it's pretty important to keep the faith is that you have to show people what it is you're up to. So as long as these people deliver at least on part of what they're promising over time, enough so that they can guarantee that resources will continue to flow to them, then eventually they're going to land somewhere. I think that's how I see it. I mean, eventually they'll find land at some point if they keep sailing around.
But those investors don't necessarily need a financial return. They might be getting something else out of it, like the cosmic story of going to space, or the story of Tesla saving the planet, or that is what they're getting. They're investing in a mission. They're investing
Pretty
in the
much.
story, right? And they're funding that. Maybe they're not expecting a return and never pull the money out of Tesla ever because they think they're contributing to a cause, if you know what I mean. It's
Yeah,
cause-based capitalism.
Tesla as an energy company. I've heard people call it an energy company. It's not an automaker. It's an energy company. Okay, interesting.
I'd have to think about that one. But yeah,
Yeah,
you
that's
get my point about the emotional payback that people get from Elon Musk's work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, all power to them. If you have the resources to spare to throw at this guy, as long as he's not a total incompetent buffoon, which I don't think Elon is. I think he is delivering on something. At least he's not wasting his time. He's doing something. He's doing something with that money. And it's not personal enrichment, I think, not completely. So I don't really I don't really have a problem with this model of fake it till you make it and just attract resources and keep plowing through until you land somewhere. Uh, I, it may be why I don't hate Cardano. A lot of people hate Cardano. If you listen to their arguments, they're going to be like, well, they haven't delivered anything in years. I'm like, yeah, so what? I mean, they're doing something. I mean, I started following this project when it was just a bunch of white papers. Now it's not a bunch of white papers. I mean, smart contracts are around the corner. This is the promised land back in 2017 is smart contracts. When smart contracts? When is it going to be decentralized? I mean, we're almost there. And now they're complaining that, well, yeah, but they don't work like Ethereum smart contracts. Yeah, I know. We all knew that. So what? I mean, they're not wasting their time. And as long as that's the case, I think in my opinion, or at least in my book, they get the benefit of the doubt. I don't know what's going to happen down the road, but I'm pretty happy to support them because I'm happy with the work they've done so far. It makes sense to me. So that's how I see Starlink. That's how I see some of Elon's more crazy projects. I think the whole Mars thing is nonsense, but I think that even if you get to the moon while you're trying to get to Mars, even if you never make it to Mars, hey, at least you made it to the moon. So who cares?
Sure. This is in this entire category of like innovation investing, so maybe different rules apply in that realm.
I think so.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll leave it there for today. Thanks again for being on the Sunday special once again.
My pleasure.
All right, that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Wise Crypto Sunday Special. Keep your eye on your inbox for the next episode. Until then, it's me, Chris Coney, saying bye for now.